aviation consultant specialized in aviation fuel with 30 years experience in the industry. Ravin was educated in England and holds a mechanical engineering degree from Northeast London Polytechnic, an MBA from Surrey University, and a PhD from Cranfield University. He is currently CEO of Aviation Fuel Solutions International Incorporated, a federally incorporated company in Canada. He has worked for international airlines, including Air Mauritius, Singapore Airlines, Air Austral, the International Aviation Transport Association, known as the IATA, and it is an aviation fuel safety expert for the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. He has an interest in sustainable aviation fuel and has previously contributed to various aviation fuel forums. Ravin is a member of the Baha'i international community and serving in Eastern Ontario, Quebec, and Nunavut regions and territory. He subscribes to the concept of oneness of humanity, seeing the latter as one people living in one global homeland. After his presentation, we'll continue the conversation with questions and comments. So have those ready for afterwards, and you can put them in the chat if you like, or keep them in your mind, and then we'll respond to hands afterwards. Thank you very much, Ravin.
Thank you so much, Heather, for the introduction. So, well, thank you to the environmental group and inviting me into your space tonight, and hopefully we'll share some useful information with you as regards the environment and in particular the challenges of the aviation industry when it comes to emissions. So I love the music, the beat, and the reading, so really wonderful. So I will share my screen and I will have Aaron to help me with some video clips. So my challenge tonight will be to get through the slides in 30 minutes. I've been given an extra 10 minutes, so please bear with me. So can you see my screens, friends?
Yes, but I don't think it's in presentation view.
Yeah. Here we go.
Great, thank you. All
right, so I mean, the title is what Heather just mentioned, the challenge faced by aviation in terms of its emission and carbon footprint in the world. So I just thought, to just mention something that you probably, understand and is very much aware of. The aviation industry is a truly global industry, and if there's one industry that is emblematic of the interconnectedness of the world, it is the aviation industry, and it's highly regulated and with standards and protocols which are harmonized and across the world, and its growth and operations are very much dependent on the principles of reciprocity and cooperation. So having worked for over 25 years in this industry, I saw that up close, although by nature it is also a very competitive industry as well. So I just thought I'd start off with this quote from Baha'i in terms of the earth and one homeland and one habitation. It behoveth you to abandon vainglory, which causeth alienation, and to set your hearts on whatever will ensure harmony. In fact, the readings tonight were very much captured this, the spirit of this quote from Baha'u'llah. Just some facts and figures before we get into the environmental challenge. We've got about 1,500 airlines operating worldwide, and 34,000 commercial aircraft flying the sky, and covering almost 4,000 airports around the world. So lots of flying, lots of aircraft equipment in the air as we speak. We have about 4.5 billion passengers a year in 2019 pre-COVID that were carried by the world's airlines. So it's really phenomenal in terms of the traffic. And as you probably know, 80% of the aviation CO2 emissions are emitted by the longer range kind of flights, which are over 1,500 kilometers, for which there is no practical alternative mode of transport. So in terms of figures, flights produce 915 million tons of CO2, quite staggering when you think about the sheer magnitude of this emission that is put out in the atmosphere. And globally, we produce about 43 billion tons of CO2. So it represents about 2.1%, depending on which research you kind of consult. You will see some quote 2.1 or 3% of all human-induced carbon emissions, CO2 emissions coming from aviation. But when you put it in perspective of transportation, aviation is actually responsible for 12% of CO2 emissions from all transport sources. So the issue with aviation, although seemingly a low kind of contributor, it's actually the growth. And you can see from this graphic how commercial airlines have increased their fuel consumption and as a result, their emissions. In 2009, it reached an all-time high of, in 2019 rather, 95 billion gallons of US gallons of jet fuel that were consumed by the commercial aviation industry. However, due to the pandemic, you could see the drop, in 2020 and 2021. In fact, the sky were much cleaner and the air was also much more healthier to breathe during the pandemic. But this is certainly not going to be lasting as the traffic picks up and we can see all the pent-up demands in the industry now coming, and we see the affluence at the airports and people traveling to pre-COVID and traffic activity to pre-COVID levels. But just to put, the figures are pretty staggering and daunting in terms of the emissions and the consumption. So 915 million tons of CO2, emitted annually. So as I said, it's 2% or more, but it's not just CO2. But research is ongoing to investigate, the rather complex physical and chemical reactions that occur in the upper atmosphere. Unlike other contributors, aviation is actually contributing, at a much higher level in the atmosphere, 30,000 feet above, and science is not exact and is not, developed enough to really understand what's happening to our environment. So it's CO2, but there's more than CO2, and this kind of slide captures all the other emissions that come from combusting jet fuel in the turbines engine. So you would see a number of those contributors. There are obviously the nitrous gases, the sulfur oxides, the particles, all those that are contributing to contrails and cirrus clouds. All those have this kind of global warming effect. But by and large, CO2 is the largest kind of contributor, accounting for 70% of the exhaust coming from the aircraft engine. So just as a matter of interest, if you are burning combusting jet fuel, the conversion is 3.16 to CO2. If 1 kilogram of jet fuel is consumed or combusted, you would have the equivalent of 3.16 kilograms of CO2. So regardless of the phase of flight, and and the other challenge is that it has an extended lifetime, and it stays in the atmosphere and makes it a very potent greenhouse gas. So there's obviously other emissions, including water vapor, which contribute to the formation of clouds, which also trap the infrared rays and producing a warming effect, which is sometimes, the scientists did research about 3 times the impact of CO2 itself. So you can see that, there are other emissions beyond just CO2. So as I mentioned, CO2 stays for a long time, and they are absorbed by oceans and forests within 30 years. And half of that, and another 30% will be removed, in 100 years, and the remaining will stay in the atmosphere for many thousands of years. So that's why we pay particular attention to CO2. The family just came back from a trip to Mauritius, and I thought, it'd be interesting to see what was our carbon footprint, at least as the flights were concerned. We flew Montreal to Paris, Charles de Gaulle, and then Paris, Charles de Gaulle to Mauritius. And this is just one view of the north of the island where we were, and we were kind of heavy, with a heavy heart. We had to leave that spot and come to snow here in Canada, but that was our trip to Mauritius. So I did a bit of a kind of tracking of the flight, and there are some softwares, programs that you could use for any flight. You could try to put your data and your airports and the dates. You could literally see what routes the aircraft flew on your flight. So here we had 2 segments, obviously, the Montreal to Charles de Gaulle, and then the Charles de Gaulle to Mauritius. So you can do that and see how the flights, the routes that were, flown by the aircraft on that particular flight. So more interestingly, I thought, why don't I calculate the emissions from that flight, considering we were 8 of us in all, and we have some calculator that are already in the public domain, and one which is internationally approved is from ICAO. It's the carbon emissions calculator. It will allow passengers to estimate the emissions attributed to their air travel. So what I did is I went into the calculator and input all the details of how many passengers we were in the economy class, and also what legs we flew. And it turned out that, our return trip, we actually contributed 12 tons of CO2 on that journey. Obviously, we were in an aircraft, a wide body aircraft of Boeing 777, which had 300 plus passengers. They all contributed to that kind of magnitude of CO2 from that trip. So when we do kind of understand our carbon footprint or the emissions through the activity, whether we are flying or using ground transportation, we talk about carbon offsetting. We are all responsible, individuals, but businesses, governments, for reducing our carbon emissions that we create. So to some extent, you can compensate your emissions by paying someone to make an equivalent greenhouse gas saving. This is known, carbon offsetting. I'm pretty sure many of you have had a chance to offset your emissions from your flight by purchasing or buying this carbon credit, as we call them. So normally there will be money funding that will be invested in projects such as renewable energy from wind farms, hydro plants, and we get to have more awareness these days, with more people and businesses volunteering to offset their emissions. It's coming now to become to be a regular offering that most international airlines offer to their customers. But I should say also, offsetting is not really a cure for climate change. offsetting is your assumption is that there is a project out there that is extracting or removing this carbon, the CO2 that you're emitting from your activity. But the real cure would be to reduce our emissions, and if done the right way, it can reduce our impact, the impact of our actions, and help raise awareness of the issue. So there's also some discussion or debate around the effectiveness of offsetting, whether the money and the funding is actually going to projects which are really removing or sequestrating or removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So that this is something that obviously some people are concerned about, but there are projects which are verified and certified, and if we are kind of thinking of buying carbon credit, we want to make sure that our contribution is going to the right project. So here I've kind of in the slide given you a sense of all those different projects that could be candidates for offsetting. So you would have agriculture, energy efficiency, forestry, household devices, renewable energy, transportation, waste disposal, etc. So there are many more new projects coming online, on stream, but not enough, I should say, to offset the emissions that we are continuously putting out in the atmosphere. So in terms of the challenge, the aviation industry is growing to the pace of 5% every year, and it's staggering in terms of what the growth will be 20 years or 25 years from now. So the aviation industry has for some time been thinking about even before those COP meetings where aviation was not even part of the conversation, but the industry was quite proactive. So in way back in 2008, they started talking about some ambitious, audacious goals that the industry could set itself. So we've come to this net zero commitment of airlines to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. So at the last annual general meeting of IATA, and on the 4th of October 2021, they passed a resolution where all the member airlines committed to this goal to achieve net zero by 2050. So this pledge actually is in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. However, to succeed, this will require the coordinated efforts of the entire industry. So it's not just the individuals offsetting their carbon, their emissions, but it's airlines, airports, ANSP, air navigation service providers, manufacturers, and significant government support, I should say. So achieving net zero by 2050 will require a combination of maximum elimination of emissions at source, but also offsetting and carbon capture technology. So this graphic, this pie chart that you can see, 65% of that goal will be met by what we call sustainable aviation fuel, SAF for short. But then the rest is new technology, electric, hydrogen powered aircraft, infrastructure, the airspace and operational efficiencies on ground as well, and also offsets and carbon capture. I will stop sharing my screen to allow Aaron to play a little clip. Aaron?
On the flight path to sustainability, sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, will play a major role. Did you know that by using sources such as household waste, used cooking oil, or plants like carinata instead of traditional jet fuel, we can reduce life cycle CO2 emissions by up to 80%. On top of this potential to greatly reduce aviation's carbon footprint, airlines have committed to only use SAF, made from truly sustainable sources that conserve ecological balance. Over 200,000 flights have taken off using SAF since 2016. More than 40 airlines now have experience with it, and the industry has committed to buy another 6 billion litres in the coming years. We've made a start, but we need a lot more. A tipping point for SAF will be when it powers around 2% of all flights, something we think will be possible as soon as 2025. This will create the momentum for much faster increases in SAF production for future years. At this point, it will start making a significant impact on reducing aviation's overall carbon emissions. To get to this point, SAF production needs to grow from its current level to 7 billion litres a year in 2025. For this to be a reality, SAF needs to scale fast. Today, SAF costs more to produce than conventional kerosene and renewable diesel. It is only available in limited locations and lacks needed government support. Production is gradually springing up at facilities around the globe using various sources. But we need even more thrust to reach this goal. What's more, aviation has to compete for sustainable fuel production with ground transport, which has the ability to use other forms of clean energy like electricity. However, air transport has fewer options at this time and is far more dependent on sustainable fuels for its climate action. SAF can make a crucial contribution to a sustainable future. With continuous airline demand and strong government backing, support for research and development, an incentive framework like those already in place for ground transport, and public-private partnerships could make all the difference. While SAF has seen decent growth so far, this is a sector that is about to take off. As new production facilities come on stream over the next few years, output will increase exponentially. With the right support, the tipping point of 7 billion litres is within our reach. Despite a promising start, SAF is yet to go mainstream. Similarly, uptake was also a challenge for other sustainable technologies in their early phases. Wind energy and solar installations grew slowly for years before going on to make a sizable contribution to electricity generation. Electric cars had only a tiny market share when first invented. Now, sales are expected to surpass those of internal combustion engine cars by 2038. These successes were made possible by robust public sector support and favorable regulatory regimes. Green technologies are often immature and need nurturing until they are commercially viable. They need the right policy environment and, in some cases, subsidies, so technologies can be perfected and economies of scale achieved before taking their place in a competitive market. Ramping up production of SAF could also create new jobs and new opportunities for communities and energy independence for countries. With the right policies, initiative, and leadership, SAF can be a ticket to our destination. Carbon-neutral growth from 2020 onwards, and cutting CO2 output in half by 2050. Flying is freedom. SAF can fuel this freedom for a brighter future. Now, we all need to be on board to shape a sustainable future together.
Thank you, Aaron. Just continue. So can you see my screen?
I can't see the slides.
share the screen again. So.
Now we have it.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I think that clip was pretty much comprehensive and kind of put SAF in perspective. However, decarbonizing the aviation sector implies a number of strategies and technological innovation. Already the industry has saved almost like 3.3 billion tons of CO2 if you consider the first generation kind of jet aircraft, and until this day, they're much more fuel efficient. You can see the red kind of line there, which is emissions if they were frozen at 1990 technology, and what that would have meant in terms of CO2 and fuel consumption. But technology has, in terms of airframe and engine, technologies have improved such that the jet aircraft of today are much more fuel efficient than they used to be back in the day. So obviously we just talk about sustainable aviation fuel, like with the potential to decarbonize to 80% compared to fossil fuel. Operational improvements, the aircraft of today tend to be much lighter, more efficient. We're using new air traffic control techniques to save emissions. The kind of flight profile in terms of the use of flight controls like the flaps, the deployment of the flaps, at what altitude, on ascent and descent, are all contributing to saving hundreds of kilos of CO2 per flight, but added on thousands of flights, this does make a significant contribution. So you can see operational improvement is pretty much part of the equation. Air navigation service providers, obviously, the airspace, is not harmonized across the world, even in Europe. With all the states in the European Union, you would see that you don't fly necessarily the most direct route, and those are continuously being looked at in terms of optimal use of those airspaces so that we can have the minimum fuel burn for those flights. So, and the same across the world in various jurisdictions. Equally important is, how do we, improve the infrastructure and make them more efficient, and saving flights by just 1 minute. I was part of a campaign, when I was working for IATA, we had this save 1 minute kind of campaign to shorten flight times across the world, and it really produced phenomenal kind of results just by shaving off 1 minute in a flight, and that was a very successful campaign. So these are all different strategies that are being looked at, and it's not just SAF. So when you think about the emissions reduction roadmap, so you can see this graphic captures all those different strategies to be able to reach that minus 50% by 2050, which is a net zero carbon goal that the industry has set itself. I will skip this one. It's more of SAF, which is from cooking oil. In case you were interested, maybe I could share this presentation with you. Something like used cooking oil is actually a feedstock for making jet fuel. And just the other day, I was listening to the news or a documentary. In Japan, actually, they are promoting this, the use of this technological pathway to sort of produce jet fuel from used cooking oil, which would be obviously a source that would be renewable as you continuously have more of this supply. But mind you, even that feedstock of used cooking oil the price is going up because there's great demand for it, and the price of used cooking oil is getting to be probably as expensive as the fossil fuel itself. So the SAF industry is facing a number of challenges. Obviously, it is growing. They talk about this tipping point of 2%, 7 billion, US gallons of that SAF being produced. However, there are a number of hurdles. It's one of scale, and we don't see the supply coming as fast enough. And obviously, competition with other, with renewable diesel as well, and that doesn't help, the SAF to sort of really bring the supply that is needed. And in fact, setting targets has been the easier part of that equation, and we still need large quantities of sustainable aviation fuel at prices which the airlines can afford. Just that most airlines, the best run airlines are marginally profitable. If a good efficient airline is making 1-2%, they are doing well. Most airlines are just barely making it, especially coming from COVID. Many are loss-making and are still recovering, and that will take years in an industry that is quite cyclic, but at the same time having huge challenges to face. So currently, the price of sustainable aviation fuel is 3 times the price of fossil fuel. So it would destroy the economics of any airline if an airline decided to even if the supply was available, if the airline decided to buy its fuel, SAF, instead of the conventional fossil fuel. So all these challenges are still there. The goals are ambitious, obviously audacious, but it will require a lot of commitment by all the stakeholders to really, achieve those goals. So this is something to be seen. We will see how the world kind of really respond to the need for those to meet those challenges. So I just wanted to end this presentation by quoting from a statement of the Baha'i International Community at COP27. I'll just read it. The world that beckons, a flourishing global civilization in harmony with the natural environment is a vision toward which growing numbers are laboring. The world that beckons is one of integration and balance, beauty and maturity. It is a world with a redefined sense of progress, filled with communities and individuals working together with the support of institutions toward the realization of their highest aspirations. It is a world increasingly relieved of the destructive moral compromises, social, economic, and environmental, that have so often been asserted as necessary to progress. And just a question to end this presentation. So we see there are a range of options available to make those adjustments, but they will only narrow if we continually defer action to the future. And this is pretty much the case of aviation too. A lot of this has been deferred, and we are missing out on the targets and the timelines. So the question is, will humanity act on the truth that its own destiny and that of the planet are irrevocably intertwined? Or will still greater calamities be required to move it to action? So I would end my presentation on this note with this question. So thank you so much for your time, and hope it was useful to all of you.
Thank you very much, Ravin. I really learned a lot, and which I hadn't thought about before, actually, and also to think about how without international cooperation, we wouldn't have an airline industry, and that it is possible to cooperate, and it's possible to have rules and regulations that are applied worldwide, even though we sometimes feel maybe when looking at the UN or something that isn't possible. So that's a really positive thing to see, and yeah, it was really interesting, and we are certainly all hope that things move forward quickly in every area of endeavor. So does anyone have a question or comment that they would like to start with? Bill.
Yeah, so very good presentation on learning things. The question that came up when I was listening is that there seems to be a definition of sustainable that relates to carbon relative to carbon neutral. And it seems to me that growing all of this stock for I would call it vegetative fuel, would have the impact of biodiversity, as well as this possibility that if the fuel purchased at a higher price than a farmer could sell the food for from the same land, that it would affect the food supply. And I was wondering if this is taken into consideration a lot when we're looking at the goals and how best to achieve them. And I was also wondering if there's any movement toward incentivizing in some fashion or another the reduction of actual flying as a means to do business and the various things that people fly for.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, Bill. I mean, the last question is the short answer is no. There have been talks about how would we kind of reduce the amount of flying. In fact, some companies have been when it comes to business flying, for business reasons, have kind of curtailed their flights, but not necessarily for the reason of the environment, as for economic reasons. But nonetheless, it does have beneficial effect if you reduce the number of the number of flights. But I think, the question is, flying has become much more affordable than it used to be decades back, and it's become a commodity, or it's something that people would take, kind of several times a year now, when before it was a flight, once every 10 years or even less. So there's as the wealth of the population grows in many parts of the world, we have to deal with this demand, which is growing. So that's why it's like the 5% average is still what we foresee to be the case, going forward, and the carbon neutral or the net zero is really finding strategies to counter, but not so much in terms of reducing and then when it comes to linking city pairs, which are 1,500, like long distances, long range, you don't have alternative kind of transport methods to sort of switch to avoid flying. So there are some issues regarding that, but I think down the road, it's a question each individual should pose himself in terms of whether I can avoid this flight, or I should probably think more in terms of the environment. But right now, the industry, there's no such talk. The associations talk about the growth and what are the strategies to sort of curb the emissions, and which has been pretty successful in many ways, but there's more to be done because the growth is really outpacing any kind of reduction that we are able to achieve at this time. Now, in terms of your first question, we're talking about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, from like third or second generation feedstock, which will not pose a challenge to food security. So they are kind of organic material or feedstock coming from growth of particular algae or jatropha, or from non-arable land that are kind of considered to be maybe a solution to sort of really produce enough of, or at least a significant amount of SAF, which would not pose a food challenge to food supply chain. So there are initiatives, and it's just that there are many different technology pathways that need to be considered to really counter or to really make up for the totality, to substitute the fossil fuel. So 2050 is a very kind of, it's not so far when you consider you are already 2022, but the scaling of the production coming from different technology pathways will need to be there, but right now we don't see the investment. There's still more investment in terms of the fossil fuel, literally exploring and exploration and drilling, and kind of refining every drop of oil that can come from the ground. That's still very much the case, and that is something that obviously doesn't help.
Thank you. I was just going to ask a question while I'm waiting for another one. My first one is, compared to trains, I mean, if they were efficient trains, like trains in Europe or Korea or something like that, are they, how do they work? They're electric usually, aren't they? And they often go quite far. Like if say we had really efficient trains that went along the Quebec City Windsor corridor, would that give less CO2 than flying, for instance, from Quebec City to Windsor?
Mm-hmm. It depends where your electricity is coming from. If it's coming from hydro, yes, it is less carbon, intensive. But if it's coming from a coal plant, and you're generating electricity, obviously that is more like putting a lot of emissions. So when you think about your transportation mode, you have to look at the whole life cycle of the energy source and how it's actually brought to power the equipment or the transportation equipment. So yeah, it depends on the source and where this energy is coming from.
And my second question was about the clouds. So even if we had the fuel was all like basically carbon neutral, would we still have the problem with the clouds and the making of the cirrocumulus clouds from the entrails?
Yeah, I think the combustion, as we understand it, the science shows that, when the combustion happens, there are lots of particles, soot particles that are emitted as a byproduct of the combustion of the jet fuel. And those kind of become the nuclei around which clouds are formed. And then that's why they call it contrail. But then normally it's kind of water vapor. It doesn't last long, but if you have hundreds of flights, using the same kind of flight path, you can imagine the formation of those clouds will be there to sort of really trap the infrared and contribute to global warming. So I think they will still be there. Whether we can decarbonize and at the same time remove any particles from the emission, that remains to be seen.
Thank you. Aaron, you have your hand up.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on hydrogen as an alternative, as well as like using batteries in planes, like hybrid and electric planes.
So a good question, Aaron. In fact, when we talk about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, we call it a drop-in fuel. So meaning that the aircraft design, the ground infrastructure doesn't change. So it's exactly the same fuel, but it's coming from a feedstock which is more kind of decarbonized and renewable. So when we talk about hydrogen-powered aircraft or electric-powered aircraft, now we're talking a completely new design of the aircraft and the infrastructure to store these sources of energy. So this is further down the road, it will come, but at this point, those aircraft which are able to do that is on a limited scale, but for very short range operation. So to really challenge the typical commercial operation with a wide body aircraft with 300 or 500 passengers, those technologies are just not there. But they are on the more than the drawing board. They have proven, tested technology, but it's just a scale to match the commercial aviation operation is not feasible at this point in time, as it will require completely new redesign of as I said, the ground infrastructure for the supply of this fuel, and also the design of the aircraft. They will look very different to the current aircraft that we have today.
Thank you for your question, Aaron. Is there anyone else who has Sherry?
Yes. So Ravin, it was quite clear that the aviation industry was looking towards governments for assistance. And certainly, as you pointed out, there's been a lot of support of fossil fuel industry in terms of policies and money that, if we can shift where we're subsidizing away from, fossil fuel towards these new technologies or new renewable energies that we need, that makes everything seem more achievable, right? Because we do have resources, we just need to redirect where they're going. So I was wondering, is the aviation industry lobbying, the Western governments? Was there anything in the recent infrastructure bill that was passed in the U.S. in the past year that is looking to provide subsidies or funding for sustainable aviation fuel or other technologies to, kind of jumpstart the direction that the industry thinks we need to go in?
Yeah, sure, Sherry. It's a good question, and in fact, there is a lot of lobbying and a lot of representation made to governments, and in fact, there are programs that are very much subsidized by governments for research, and so there is a kind of bit of support, if you will, from government, even in Canada. We know that they are promoting any research that would provide and make companies supply in Canada itself, whether it's from used cooking oil or from some other renewable source. So that is still on a scale which is limited, and governments are not naturally thinking like 25 years from now. Obviously, most governments, their term is like 5 years, 4 years. So they may take some stand on or policies, but usually they are very short, kind of in terms of their short term, in terms of time frame. We really need governments and countries or regions like the European Union and others to sort of take a long kind of perspective on this if we are to achieve meaningful kind of results with this with sustainable aviation fuel. Right now, the oil companies, the big oil companies, are still kind of investing heavily in fossil fuel, and their investment is not showing on the SAF side as much as we would like to see. They do kind of try to put an image of sometimes it's almost like a smoke screen, sort of being seen as promoting those technologies, those SAF, but they're not putting their money where where they should in terms of the shift and the transition. Just a bit unfortunate that this is the state of the industry at the moment, and we will probably need some really people who are much more far-sighted to sort of take commitment and take courage to make that shift.
Thank you. It's a little depressing. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sorry for that, but that's the case.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Elia and/or Paul, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because up to now we've been talking, it's been very technical. I was just wondering, where is the spiritual dimension to this question? Maybe a consideration of wants and needs on the consumer side, or some other motivating factor that would make people want to make the kinds of changes to limit the growth of the industry, or to find solutions which are not just bottom line dollars and cents.
Well, Paul, thank you, and that was also my struggle when I was putting this presentation together. What's the spiritual dimension of this? But I could see when I was thinking a little bit deeper about the industry itself, there are many principles that apply. I mentioned a few, like the kind of cooperation and reciprocity that already exists in the industry. Otherwise, the industry would not have been global as it is today. You're flying in different countries, climes, and different environments, and you're being handled by different companies. So there's a lot of that cooperation and reciprocity happening already. But I think that's a principle, spiritual principle in itself. Actually, how much cooperation do we have towards a goal like the environment? I think there's a lot to be desired here. But by and large, having participated in many of those forums, I think there's clearly, although airlines, you could argue, are competing with each other, but when it comes to such goals like safety, for example, the safety of flights is something that this industry has delivered really, very successfully, because it's one of the safest mode of transportation. So I think the environment is pretty much in that same kind of vein, and this is coming from people who will not necessarily recognize it as a spiritual principle, but it's coming from that, understanding that we are living in an interconnected world, and we can only, work, cooperate, and reciprocate to do better. So I think there's a lot of good faith in it as well. But as I said, there are many other factors which make the challenge a formidable one. One of them being that it's hard to displace technology using fossil fuel that is so entrenched in our world. That shift will require, really some very courageous decision by policymakers and governments.
Thank you.
So I was just going to say that, so the only solution is that people fly less. They voluntarily decide that they're going to consider their wants and needs and decide to just voluntarily fly less, because all the things that you've said have just made promoted more flying. It's safer, it's cost less, et cetera, et cetera. So the only way that it's going to actually not achieve all of these, in fact, it's made it more environmentally destructive because of its success and safety and cost and so on. So the only thing that's going to make people or the airline curtail its own growth is that where people voluntarily decide to fly less.
Yeah, to some extent, yes. And then I talked about the carbon offsetting as well. which is subsidizing projects that would, remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. So there's a bit of that as well, which from this awareness that you just mentioned, Paul.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it too. Is there any other questions or comments before we finish?
I think we have Stephen.
Stephen? Oh, I didn't see you.
Yes, you had actually answered most of the questions that I had. So, but what Paul was raising was one of the areas that I was wondering about, because I guess essentially Baha'u'llah has been calling for, global level institutions to develop. And how far along is the air industry in terms of the overall global air industry in terms of anything of that sort developing? I don't really know that much about it. And it seems that the only way to really control right now is just to control the number of trips. And but everything needs everything involves trade-offs. And could you foresee a trade-off where a certain high level of transportation is allowed, but there's a cap that really forces people to think, do I need to take this trip? Because there's a lot of people right now taking trips who probably shouldn't be. And maybe others who should be instead. I don't know, but I don't know, is there something to just a bit of a damper to help us realize that maybe we should limit the number of trips that we're taking until we have the technologies that will allow us to do much cleaner flights?
Ravin? We lost.
I think he may have frozen.
Oh dear.
Yeah, he may need to dial back in or rejoin the Zoom.
Okay.
I did just want to comment, Stephen, on your question, which was excellent, and it just made me think of the fact that there are a lot of taxes and fees that we pay on air travel, and also on other forms of transportation. But when some countries have been unwilling to institute a carbon tax, which would make certain activities more expensive that emit a lot of carbon emissions. That's still a policy option that is worth considering and can have an impact. Some of these things obviously are not things that individuals necessarily can control, but I mean, we all do have voices and representatives and votes, where we have some forms of influence on policy and governments as well.
I got a note saying that he lost his connection. By the way, Ravin lives quite out in the country. Oh, and he's back. Oh, good. Okay. Welcome back, Ravin.
Sorry about that, friend. Sorry, Stephen, I wasn't trying to avoid your question. Just internet did a little trick on me. Yeah. Can you just remind me what your question was just now, quickly?
I guess part of it was what has developed kind of internationally.
Yeah, sure. So
another part is does it make sense to I guess have a bit of an imposition, because right now, one of the main means of controlling the exhaust and stuff is less travel. But
Yeah.
how can there be a balance made between you know, say controlling the amount of travel, but still having a reasonably high level? So and enough pleasure traveling and so on is done, but not excessive.
Yeah. Well, I think to that last question is the bounds of moderation, right? Which is a spiritual principle. If people can exercise moderation, obviously they will make that there's the determination of how much travel do I need to do in my lifetime, or in a year or whatever. So, but to your first question about the institutions, yes, there are institutions that are actually overseeing the growth and the safety, the environmental challenge that we've been talking about. There is the UN Agency for Aviation, which is ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, which is headquartered in Montreal. There is the International Air Transport Association, for whom I worked for some years, still doing consulting for them. They are also headquartered in Montreal. So there are global associations which are actually looking at those challenges and constantly, garnering support, rallying, lobbying governments and various authorities worldwide to make sure that, as I said, aviation was one of the first to set itself a very ambitious goal way back in the early 2000s about carbon neutral and net zero emission by 2050. No other industry had set itself such goals, but setting goals is the easier part, as I mentioned, but achieving it requires much more work and cooperation from various stakeholders, not the least the business community as well. The business community is not necessarily looking at the environment in terms of its, challenges. They're looking at very short-term business results, like return on investment. If they don't see return on invested ROI in the SAF, for example, you can be certain where the decision will go in terms of other opportunities for growth and profit. So these are things that we are grappling with, and there's no easy answer to that. And at the same time, we're hoping that people get to be more aware of what this is causing to the environment and hopefully make the right decisions.
Thank you. Bill, you would be our last comment or question.
Okay, well, this is a little bit flippant, but it just seems to me like we were talking about how we have incentivized, and we have promoted essentially how great flying is in terms of safety and in terms of cost. And I just wanted to kind of chime in that hey, I just flew down here with my family from Dallas, and I had so much fun that I'm just about thinking about either walking or driving back to Ottawa. So I think there is some incentive away from flying, and that is it seems like the whole industry has become giant cattle car kind of, that humanity's been, the soul of traveling, and it's kind of been sucked out of it, and that's bound to have people who have options, and that's bound to have an impact. So the idea, when you go on a horrible adventure on the airlines, you can stop and think about maybe how this is great because it's disincentivizing. It's bringing people to that spiritual place where they realize that maybe unnecessary travel is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's been some major service problems, certainly in the last year, I think, with traveling places. Anyway, my throat is very dry tonight. Thank you very much. John Dye, do you want to end with a prayer or anything? That are the kids still there? Or a song?
Yes, everybody is still here. We're going to play one more song for you guys.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful young people we have in Barhaven. This is great.
Okay. Timber, can you use that marimba? What is on what you play? This is one out. No.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. And anyway, it's a wonderful upbeat way to end our evening, and we hope to see people again. Thank you to Jean Dye, and who else is it? Jean Dye and Rakia and Tandaway and Tamba and Maya, and also to Ravin, and to all our technical work from Aaron. And we hope to see you the next time. Our next cafe will be January 31st. And Bill Kelly, we have heard his voice this evening, is going to give a presentation on the pathway to a carbon neutral home, a practical guide to transform your home for clean energy, which the Kellys have done. I can attest to that. So thank you everybody for coming. It is so good to see you. And I hope to see everybody in person or online sometime soon. Have a great rest of the evening. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Good night, Aaron. Good night, everybody. Good night, Heather.
Good
Very
night.
nice presentation.
Thank you.
Night,
Good
Bill.
night. Night, Eric.
Good. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, it was
Good
wonderful.
night.
Night, Jerry.
Good night, guys.
Bye.